Chapter 9, Goodbye Gorillas. Jack couldn't stop smiling. He had scared off a leopard. Bubba and Ho-Ho stared at Jack with awe. Annie looked at him with awe too. "When did you learn to do that?" she asked. Before Jack could answer, he heard a rustling in the bush. Then Big Guy stepped out from the shrubs. The giant gorilla walked silently over to Annie, and he took little Guy from her and put the baby on his back. Then he touched Annie's cheek gently. Annie grinned at him, and Bubba and Ho-Ho ran to Big Guy and clung to his legs. The giant gorilla barked at the small ones, directing them to come with him. As he walked past Jack, Big Guy stopped. "Ha, ha, ha," he said in a lower voice. He reached out toward Jack. Jack ducked, but the silverback patted him on the head. Then he and the small gorillas moved out of sight. Jack felt as if the top of his head were glowing. "Wow," he whispered. "Did you see what he just did?" "Yeah," said Annie. "He must have watched the show you put on. He was proud of you." "Well, he was proud of you too," Jack said modestly. Annie nodded, smiling. "I guess it's time to leave now," she said. "Leave?" said Jack. "We have to say goodbye now," said Annie. "Goodbye?" said Jack. He didn't want to say goodbye to the gorillas. He loved them. They were totally great. "Yeah," Annie said softly. "Come on." She led the way back through the shrubs and around the tree to the clearing. They found all the gorillas awake. Some were stretching and yawning. Others were munching on grass or leaves. The baby was back in his mother's arms. Bubba and Ho-Ho were chattering away to their moms, and they'd probably tell them what I did, Jack thought. He and Annie walked over to Big Guy and stood in front of him. The other gorillas gathered around. "We have to go now," Annie said to all of them. "We have to say goodbye," said Jack. "Thanks for letting us be a part of your family," said Annie. She and Jack held up their hands and waved. The gorillas looked sad, and they murmured soft sounds. Big Guy lifted his hand in the air as if he were to wave, but instead, Silverback raised his thumb, his index finger, and his left finger. "I love you," the giant gorilla sighed. Jack couldn't believe his eyes. Annie signed back, "I love you," Jack signed too. The silverback stared at them for a long moment with a gentle, shy look. Then he turned away and gave a short bark to his family. All the gorillas lined up behind him, and the baby's mother held her baby close. Ho-Ho rode piggyback on his mom. Bubba held her mom's hand. The silverback stared away from the clearing, and the others followed. Bubba was the only one who looked back. She screeched and waved at Jack and Annie. Then she walked away out of sight. Jack couldn't talk. His heart was too full. He took a few steps in the direction of the gorillas. "Hey," Annie said softly, "you're going the wrong way." Jack looked back at her. "The treehouse is over here," she said, and she pointed in the opposite direction as the treehouse peeked out from the fog. Jack sighed. Then he turned and started to follow her out of the clearing. "Oh, don't forget this," said Annie, and she leaned over and picked up Jack's backpack from the grass. She handed it to him. "Thanks," he said. They kept walking. "And don't forget this," said Annie. She picked up Jack's jacket from under the tree, and she handed it to him. "Thanks," said Jack. And he tied his jacket around his waist, and they kept walking. "And don't forget these," said Annie. She picked up the flashlight and the umbrella, and they laid on the grass under the wide, mossy limbs of a fat tree. Annie picked them and carried them herself. It started to drizzle again just as she and Jack got up to the rope ladder, and they climbed up into the tree house. When they got inside, they looked out the window. Jack hoped to catch one last glimpse of the gorilla's family, but there was nothing to see. A white mist covered the cloud forest. Annie picked up the Pennsylvania book. She pointed to the picture of the Frog Creek woods. "I wish we could go home," she said, and suddenly a joyful screech ran out. Happily wild sound shot through the white mist, through the cool rain, straight into Jack's heart. He opened his mouth to answer the call of the gorillas, but it was too late. The wind began to blow. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster, and then everything was still, absolutely still. Chapter 10, A Special Magic. Tack, tack, tack. Jack opened his eyes, and the Frog Creek woods were still dark and rainy. "We're home," Annie said. Jack sighed. "I missed them already," he said. "Me too," said Annie. "Did you take a lot of notes on your habit and behaviors?" Jack shrugged. "I listed a few things about them," he said, "but sometimes lists don't tell you much. You have to love gorillas to really know them." "Yeah, that's right," said Annie. Jack opened his backpack. He pulled out the research notebook and put it in the corner. Then he pulled out the twig that Ho-Ho had given him, and he smiled as he showed it to Annie. "I promised Ho-Ho I'd eat this later," he said, "but I think we should save it for Morgan instead." "Good idea," said Annie. "It'll prove to her that we found a special magic." "Yeah, gorilla magic," said Jack. "The magic of all animals," said Annie. "Yeah," said Jack. He placed the twig next to the scrolls they brought back from Old England. "Let's go," said Annie. She started down. Jack pulled on his backpack. He put the flashlight in his pack, and then he grabbed the umbrella and followed Annie. They started through the Frog Creek woods. It was still cool and dark and rainy. Jack didn't mind, though. He didn't put on his jacket. He didn't take out the flashlight. He didn't put up the umbrella. Jack felt as if we weren't completely human yet. There was still a bit of gorilla left in him. "Ho, ho, ho," he said in a low voice. "Bubba," Annie said back. "Ha, ha, ha," they said together. This is more facts for Annie, Jack, and Annie and you. Gorillas are the biggest members of the group of animals we call primates. Other primates include chimpanzees, orangutans, gibbons, baboons, monkeys, and humans. All gorillas live in Africa, and there are three groups of gorillas: western lowland gorillas, eastern lowland gorillas, and mountain gorillas. Mountain gorillas are the largest gorillas. They have long hair and longer jaws and teeth than lowland gorillas. Mountain gorillas live in the volcanic mountain of Virunga in eastern central Africa. The word Virunga means a lonely mountain that reaches to the clouds. Gorillas are mainly herbivores or plant eaters, and they keep on the move so they will not deplete a feeding area. A silverback gorilla can eat up to 50 pounds of forest vegetation in only one day.